Gamers. I don't like that my bed is in frame. What if I put this canister of Edgar Allan Poe here to make it a little less intimate? And I have Washington Irving, don't worry. That definitely fits the aesthetic of this video. And this right here, folks, is set decor.
GK, I gave up.
Hey, wouldn't you believe you're getting scripted content this week? 2 uploads back to back, 2. Cross your fingers, maybe there'll even be more. Oh, probably. Oh, I'm not gonna make any empty promises though. Oh, right away. I just gotta say thank you for the instant appreciation on that last post of mine that just kind of came out of nowhere. Honestly, I like doing this. I love talking about all things pop culture. I also do want to do some more fantastical things soon. You'll see that later this month. Going on adventures like when I used to go to like the Ren Fair and stuff, and kind of seeing immersive experiences in a post-pandemic lens. And I was still asking a simple life question paired with it, like, can you go to a Ren Fair alone? If you want to stick around for any of it, make sure I'm going to do the YouTuber thing, subscribe. And if you're enjoying this video, make sure to like it and save it for later if you can't watch it all right now. Comment down below thoughts and opinions as you listen. Let me just jump into it and then we'll talk, okay? Today's topic isn't too far off from that like musical lens, I guess, in some way, because like, to be fair, it's got a whole soundtrack that's like diegetically in the movie.
Let's start with Launchpad McQuack.
That's not the actual title of this.
In the show specifically we're going to talk about, Scott Pilgrim takes off.
Wow.
I became a huge fan of Scott Pilgrim in college, both as a comic and as the movie. Film bros kept bringing it up to me nonstop, so I just kind of gave in and was like, fine, I'll watch it. I think they kept bringing it up to me because I was a rollerblading, hair dyeing, tea loving, Amazon working, manic pixie dream girl at that point in my life. Oh, and kind of gay.
Huh?
Gay.
Hmm?
Kind of gay. Gay. Woo! After getting into Scott Pilgrim, like I was quickly obsessed with it. I really like the characters, the comedy, the performance and the direction is fantastic. Hey, not to mention this movie's a huge sexual awakening for everybody because there's so many interesting, cool characters, and somebody did something for someone. Someone served enough for pretty much every person. And for me, that was Envy Adams with a little Todd Ingram on the side. We have to state at some point in this video, Black Sheep is cinematically one of the most important scenes to exist. And you can't tell me I'm wrong. I think the history of Scott Pilgrim's really interesting. Scott Pilgrim's really had some ups and downs in terms of its reception, certain characters' relationships with different audience members, right? After the movie came out, I think a lot of dude bros, like back in the 2010s especially, didn't quite pick up that Scott wasn't exactly like an amazing hero character.
In my sources in the description, you can find an interview that CBC did with Brian Lee O'Malley, who created Scott Pilgrim, and I really appreciate the interview in general. It's very straightforward and talking with Brian about the impact of Scott Pilgrim and how he discusses he wasn't really equipped with the idea of having an audience, and then all of a sudden he had a huge one, and articulating a morally great character was something he didn't need to do so aggressively in his brain initially. And then all of a sudden it was a very big deal. And he is also very straightforward and not being Scott, not relating to Scott. And he's quoted in this saying, I feel like in this day and age, I had to provide clarity on that because when I wrote the first books, I took it for granted that people would understand that dating a high schooler was a bad thing. But on the internet in this day and age, people are like, he's dating a high schooler. That's terrible. Like, that's pretty much what I said on page 1 of the book. But I tried to spell it out a little bit more this time.
Nobody ever said they were good people. However, at this time period, I don't think that our media literacy levels, as well as our relationship with solipsism amongst millennials and even Gen Z, later years accidentally idolizing certain characters as a certain inspiration unto your own lives.
Also in the description, there are resources about solipsism and main character syndrome. There's kind of a hard bridge that does not exist in terms of people discussing Gen Z's relationship with solipsism because it's a new conversation on the internet happening as of like the past week or so. So I understand that we haven't deeply studied that quite yet, but main character syndrome kind of comes into play with that. So I put a lot of that resource in there as well because it really connects with solipsism very strongly. Also, I struggle finding the negative effects of extreme character bonding when it goes too far, but if I mention the character like the Joker, we know it exists on an incredibly extreme level, right? But talking about it on more of a mundane level like Scott Pilgrim is really hard. But I can tell you on a first account, I've known guys that idolize Scott Pilgrim and copy paste his life to theirs and have dated high schoolers. So I mean, I know it exists, but I don't know how else to prove it to you, okay? I'm sorry.
His character stands as a very interesting character because he is like this modern loser archetype, right? And he gets to win to a certain extent. However, I think that Scott Pilgrim takes off, fixes a lot of the accidental damage of the original story that it may have done to certain groups of people over the past decade, shifting their behavior, altering their behavior to do not so great things, maybe, an influence of it. It holds the characters in the original story way more accountable because apparently we needed that, unfortunately. I don't think that general audiences being silly gooses about this topic is really anyone's fault, considering, again, the culture we've been in. Just gonna be real for a second, okay? Little side tangent, we'll swing back around. Our relationship with morality and storytelling over the past 50 years has been really warped and actually heavily Christianity based in terms of what is good and what is bad. I always like to make the joke that it's Star Wars' fault, but Star Wars and a lot of other hero villain franchises, and that's not dissing Star Wars or these other franchises either, I love them, but they've had this interesting impact on our opinions of morality and ethics, and I think they are a huge perpetrator of this in cinema. It's shook out this like weird dynamic where people can only be good or they can only be bad. You can only be a hero or a villain instead of just protagonist and antagonist in a story. In the last few years though, we've seen this rise of anti-heroes and this concept of people being more morally gray in media. It aligns very well with the deconstruction culture we live in too, not gonna lie. In reflection of our own personal actions right now, we're able to put this kind of concept to paper more and also watch it and feel seen and heard and comprehend it a little bit better than before, like, 10 to 20 years ago. It doesn't always bode great with the prevalent solipsism I mentioned earlier. And a lot of us has bred thanks to like social media and crazy current events of the 21st century that we've experienced in the United States of America. I don't blame us for having developed this type of structure in our brains. However, we need to get over the fact that no, we don't live in the Matrix. No, we're not the only living person on the planet. Everybody is conscious and aware. Shut up. I do think we're starting to slowly call this out and try to figure out a way to work around it and remember that everybody is real. I think a piece like Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is important for this, and it's illuminated this very issue aggressively, letting people just be fucking people. Wow. Okay. This is where spoiler territory comes in for the show. So if you want absolutely no spoilers on the show, save this to your watch later, go watch the show, come back. With the criticisms of Scott Pilgrim as a character, I think it's really smart that the showrunner's first basic idea or solution to the original story and trying to progress the story further and more effectively in a new way is to just take Scott out of the story entirely in some way. In a lot of the franchise comics right now, there have been certain pieces that really go into these AU territories, multiversey kind of territories that explore very specific what ifs out of now this person's steampunk. It's an alteration of the world. Maybe you're in the Wild West, maybe you're in a noir film kind of thing. And instead, approaching it from this AU, Scott dies. What is the story that was initially about him going to change if they were to change this one simple thing about it that is the title character of the story? Yesterday, I actually finished this Black Widow comic, for instance, and the whole basis of it is something's very wrong with Natasha. She's happy, and it's not a full AU, but it does explore this idea of if this character got to be happy because she's a character notoriously known for inevitably not put herself first in any way, shape, or form. And it's freaking brilliant. Highly recommend if you're a comic person. This is what I mean though. I love these ideas of working off of, if we're going to use existing IPs, what if we explore these ideas of something like happiness or something like the existence of the moral of the story shifting just because of the absence of one specific character. This allowed for us to explore a lot of the other characters by taking away something from them that's fundamental to who they initially were. And I think that allows for some fascinating new character development. It implements a lot of what ifs, and it really it becomes this thing that you can really reflect on in your own personal life, because there's so many characters that have a bit of an archetype to them that we probably know somebody that fits into one of them, or we may feel like we fit into one of them, right? By giving you that first setup that we know and love in the comics and the initial movie, you're reminded of the world building that you've come to know and love from back in the day. And by taking him out at the first like iconic threshold fight thing that he has to do, it's jaw-dropping because you didn't expect it, and they don't blatantly say what's going to happen with the show, and you just start to sell yourself on, oh, this is just a recreation of the original story. That's fun. What? Wait, that's different. That's not supposed to be happening. What? And from there, it establishes this expectation of you really don't know what's going to happen next. And I love that there's just a cliffhanger at the end of every single episode that really keeps you rolling. And there's almost no way to not binge this because of that. Getting into what I was saying a little bit earlier with like Ramona as a character she represents a different kind of like loser protagonist in this that I think is really interesting. And I think is something we're starting to see in the rise in like coming of age stories, which is what it means to be a loser if you're not a cisgendered man. We have to recognize that there's this concept to the loser, or a stereotype that's been given to a subgenre of men in media. It coordinates to a certain degree with like nerds and gamers and losers and like anything nerdy to older generations. I don't think that holds up for like Gen Z, for instance. I don't think people think those kinds of people would be losers, but that's why it's shifting all the time, right? I've been seeing a lot of people start posting about the idea of like to be a girl loser online, like on TikTok. I've seen edits where people take certain characters and talk about it, with like Fleabag being a very big primary example. And to me, it's like, I really like the idea that it's just someone like, for instance, maybe with Ramona, a woman who has not gotten closure for her past actions for herself, or helping anyone from her past whatsoever who might need it in order to move forward. She might have unrightfully hurt. Because at the end of the day, it's often what the concept of a loser is really in all actuality, is just like people not learning from their mistakes. It's not someone just like at the bottom of the barrel in terms of their life outcome anymore, because like aren't we all to a certain degree scraping by, trying to survive? But it's someone who's just trying to figure out how to be a functioning human being in a way that works for them in their inner world and their outer world, perhaps even. And that's not to say that like Ramona did stuff at an extreme of Scott or other loser-like characters in pieces of media. Like, I think comparing Ramona to Fleabag is crazy. But I really like that she becomes this well-rounded character that we get to see and understand a bit more in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. I've loved her from the get-go, and I think that's just because I went into watching Scott Pilgrim and reading Scott Pilgrim knowing I'm going to relate to her because of just how she appears on paper. It's really fascinating because it's in general just presenting this concept as an option for people. And I think we're going to see that continue to be presented in certain pieces of media from here forward, of just talking it out with people. I think that that's been a thing, but I think that it'll continue. And I'm hoping that we all can take a lesson from this in terms of like healing from past things that have happened to us with our own past actions and others as well. What's really cool about the show is that it actually shows options of doing so, because there's not only one way to do it. It's not always a conversation with someone else about the stuff that's happened between you two and seeking solace for the past. I really liked that the show paints like a different situation with each one of the exes. Like, she'll apologize to one, or she'll just communicate with another. Or some characters she'll put in their place that still need a wake-up call. And then there's some that she doesn't even talk to, because it's like, whatever. She doesn't owe them anything. Like that conversation of owing people something. It's not anything like that. It's just the ones that affect her peace in order to move forward. Cool. As well as her learning and growing too. Scott becomes a symbol of the show for Ramona, fighting for her opportunity to love. And that's really amazing to me. And because they don't have to fight each other. Also, all the fighting in the show is shown as some ridiculous option every single time, which is such a good thing to convey here too. Like, that's not gonna solve your problems. Add a new dynamic for all these other characters that didn't quite get their flowers as much as they could have in the initial story. That's also awesome. Like Wallace, Knives, Kim, Julie, I think they all really shine in this. And even Lucas Lee gets like a moment that I think took everybody off guard, and like a weird Kenergy moment. Okay, sure. And lastly, we gotta discuss that ending. By having Ramona embrace her future self, or just like her future in general, I was like a sobbing mess naturally. It's just a beautiful metaphor with like the future Scott and Ramona part of this being added. I think it was partially a smart thing to do because people have always made jokes about how Scott did all of this stuff for Ramona. And for what? You know, what if she breaks up with him in the future? All of this thought. I've seen people to say that all the time. Was she even worth it? By making this end in the way that it does of Scott wrestling with his own future identity and himself just in general, I think it's really poetic to me versus Ramona just embraces her future self. To me, it symbolizes partially this concept of self-love and validation in order to move forward and being able to give that to other people. Furthermore, embracing the idea that the future will be what it will be, you know, and to fight for someone is more worth it in the present moment, despite what could happen in the future, positively or negatively, because it's just the right thing to do for who you currently are. That's much better than to dread the unknowing of the what will happen, the what ifs, because it may inevitably end. It's most likely going to inevitably end. Most relationships end with like an end. It's an end. Everything ends. Everything ends. Who cares? Enjoy it while it lasts. That was just such a really cool ending for a show. And I in no way expected that. I didn't really know what I was expecting going into it. I didn't know that what was gonna happen. Everybody was checking in, being like, "You watched it, right?" And I was like, "Wait, not yet." And I got a lot of feedback from the get-go that it was phenomenal. I was gonna love it. So I was very excited going into it, but I didn't know what was gonna be different about it because I initially didn't think it was gonna be different plot. I thought it was just like an animated version of the story, and that was that, just kind of celebrating Scott Pilgrim for what it was. I was not let down in the slightest. I wonder if there's more opportunities for more existing IPs to take this kind of route with streaming, or something where they can explore just like other conversations with the existing characters and new material versus just 10 more remakes of the exact same story, because I'm getting a little sick of it. If we have to keep making things in IPs in the first place, I'd love to make something original, but we can't always win. I just want to thank anyone that like worked on it in doing so. You made a really cool thing that really affected me. Thank you. Even down to the art style, like being what it was, and the small choices they made just artistically on the show. Not to mention the voice cast coming back for everything. Oh my God. So thank you, crazy Canadians. Thank you so much. And thank you to you for sticking around and joining me as I asked the question, what business does Scott Pilgrim Takes Off have being that good? I really appreciate it. Tune back in next week where I'll be posting a little Christmassy related video, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. Like I said before, let me know your thoughts on Scott Pilgrim below. I'd love to hear them. And I'll see you around, especially if you subscribe. But I'll see you around. Have a lovely little day, night, week. Cheers.